could. Yeah, that should be a good one to have. Yeah, the lumens. Okay. Oh, yeah, check now. Let me see something. Sorry about this, huh? Want us to just plug it back in them? You want to reset the projector? You know, it's a chrome, but there's
Oh boy, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Wait, so you extend
display.
the view. So you extend it. So we're showing here both here and over there. You know where the option is?
Yeah, I have to go into settings
Right.
and just extend the view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no problem. Let's see. Search. Apologies for the tardiness. I just.
Display.
No, you're not seeing it.
You see it? Extend the view.
You want to.
What is this? Display management.
Oh, so hold on, yeah, display.
Click. Yeah. Let's see. Let's go back to display itself.
Yeah, so now, so then let's.
So display should be able to say extend.
Yeah.
Extend.
No.
It's not there. Let me turn
Yeah,
off
just-
this and turn it on.
Yeah, just.
It should have an option to say extend.
Yeah.
You want some more help? Ask cakes to help you connect it.
What's that?
If you want more help, ask cakes.
Yeah, it's just the display setting is the only thing that I'm. Okay.
When you're ready, just let me know, okay?
Yeah.
Should have an option somewhere there to say to extend the view.
Usually has the option to set to extend the view.
Mm-hmm.
I find it surprising. Like you, whenever I plug it in,
Mm-hmm.
it usually reads. Back on.
But we're gonna like it anyways.
Yeah, I'll pause it. That's why I wanted to come early in order to double check this because I know these setting. Yeah, you want you want is it possible to? I'm not getting sick. It's not connecting. Okay, yeah, the USB red. Yeah, the USB red.
That's okay.
Yes, please.
So you're leaving it, able to see that?
That's fine.
But then we close it down with the whole night thing.
Yeah, no problem. Let me just check this or something. Okay, hold on. You seen it now?
One, test, 1, 2, 2.
Let's just. Let's see, press on. Is the yeah. Yeah. It seems like it. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We are about to begin, and we will first start with an opening prayer by Mrs. Sandy Peters Phillips.
Let us pray. Father, thank you for all the marvelous things that you have done today. Thank you for your love and what you have revealed to us, and for the love that we share together in your body. I pray for a smooth flowing of this evening's proceedings and the message to take root and produce wonderful things, things of beauty and great blessings to many. Bless the speaker, and I pray for his delivery to be clear and concise. And when we are about to leave this place, thank you for walking before us. May we be alert in your promptings and live in your endless love. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, in this age, forevermore. Amen.
Thank you very much, and please remain standing as we sing the national anthem. Thank you very much. Please have your seats. The Very Reverend O. Samuel Nichols, Dean of St. George's Cathedral, other members of the clergy, Mrs. Sandy Peters Phillips, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Commerce, members of the PCC, Mr. Shafiq Sam, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor and privilege to welcome you here this afternoon in this, our lecture series. As you are aware, we have done several lectures before, and most of them would have pertained mainly to the church or to spirituality. But today, the lecture that will be delivered can be classified within the socio-economic area. And we are happy to welcome Mr. Sam, who, as you can see, is a very youthful person. And you'll be hearing a bit more from him in a very short while. I want to delve straight into the program as time is of the essence, and I now call on Mr. Louis Deschamps to give brief remarks.
Thank you, Steve, Mr. Chair. The Very Reverend O. Samuel Nichols, Dean of the St. George's Cathedral, and other members of the clergy, Mr. Sandy Phillips Peters, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, etc., and Mr. Phillips, members of the Parish Church Council, our special invited guest and presenter, Shafiq Sam, ladies and gentlemen. May I add my own warm words of welcome to you all here this afternoon, as well as to those who are following us via live stream. We are indeed delighted to have you with us. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored and delighted to deliver brief remarks on this very special occasion on the calendar of events of our parish. I thank the Dean for his kind invitation to me to assume this responsibility. I did not decline. As a member of the Parish Church Council, it is always expected that we accept willingly the responsibilities and tasks that are given to us, and that we all lead by example. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm quite sure that those of you who were here with us for the past 2 years would remember that the lectures on both occasions focused on the church as a building, with the themes being living history, the monuments of the St. George's Cathedral, and the stained glass windows of St. George's Cathedral, St. Vincent, creators and significance. We have, however, diverted from that focus this year, and we now have a new and revised objective and action plan, which both include inter alia, cathedral forums and events scheduled quarterly in a bid to attract persons from within and outside the congregation to participate in conversations of common interest, and developing partnerships between the St. George's Cathedral and other churches, and also with the wider community. And so this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have a young secondary school teacher, Shafiq Sam, a gentleman who holds undergraduate qualifications in international relations and also postgraduate qualifications in government. He's said to be a young man who's driven by ambition and who has attained his current educational qualifications by dint of sheer determination and hard work. In my capacity as a member of the Board of Governors of the Bishop's College, Kingstown, I am using this occasion to thank Mr. Sam for his dedicated service, his years of dedicated service at the Bishop's College, Kingstown. Mr. Sam, I assure you that Cecilia Akers King, our indefatigable principal, who has quite commendably transformed that institution into being one of choice by many parents, guardians, and students alike, has spoken delightfully of you and your contribution to the Bishop's College, Kingstown. Unfortunately, the public service orders clearly indicate that an employee of government can be transferred elsewhere at any time. We therefore wish you well at the intermediate high school, Mr. Sam. And so, ladies and gentlemen, here at our treasured St. George's Cathedral, we are continuing along a path that is designed to forge opportunities for collaboration with a broad range of stakeholders, in particular the Ministry of Education, the World Pediatric Project, and also the various homes for the elderly, inter alia. And in this regard, we are therefore providing a platform for individuals and groups to share their knowledge and expertise as we seek to raise the church's profile with a wider audience. This approach, ladies and gentlemen, forms part of the strategy which we are embracing as we continue along the road which will eventually end in the complete restoration of our beloved cathedral. Our St. George's Cathedral is an important part of the national landscape, and we want people here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and also those beyond our shores, to note this magnificent facility and to recognize it at every turn, and also to keep it uppermost in their thoughts as a national treasure. Moreover, we have already begun to make the necessary preparations designed to celebrate the 200th anniversary of this cathedral on September 6th next year, under the theme, St. George's Cathedral, 200 years, affirming our heritage, forging new paths. The Parish Church Council has oversight of the preparations, but more specifically, a planning committee headed by a young professional has already hit the ground running. Undoubtedly, our efforts to restore this magnificent structure require an enormous financial outlay, demanding of us a broad range of solid fundraising events here and abroad, as well as the evident embrace of the continued benevolence of every single member of our parish, our archdeaconry, our diocese, and also other interested parties. I am confident, however, ladies and gentlemen, that you will all lend the necessary support with your hearts wide open as we move along. And so, I'm ending now because I know you're all anxious to listen to Shafiq's presentation. I thank you all for listening to me and also for being here with us this afternoon. And I wish you all well. Shafiq, you have our very best wishes as you move along life's pathway. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Louis. But before we get to Shafiq, we will first stand and sing the right hand of God. Thank you very much, and please be seated. Before I introduce Mr. Sam, just a bit of housekeeping. For those of you who are not familiar with the church, toilets are located at the back of the church. And no fire drill is planned here today. So if you hear an alarm, it is serious. This lecture is being broadcast live. It is streamed via the following radio stations: Cancadi Radio in Canada, Capstream here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Fun City Radio in New York, United States, and the Facebook pages of the Diocese of the Windward Island, as well as Montgomery A. Cupid. So there are approximately 5 opportunities for people to view this particular broadcast. Now, if you look at your programs, you would have received 2 sheets of blank paper. The purpose for those 2 sheets of paper is basically for you to write your questions that you will pose to Mr. Sam. The questions will be collected, they will be brought to me, and I will read the questions. And if you don't have a pen, we will get you a pen. Shafiq Sam is a lover of history, music, and culture, and he's a regionalist at heart. He is passionate about the Caribbean, its heritage, and development. He completed a Bachelor of Science degree in International Relations and a Master of Science in Government at the University of the West Indies, Mona Campus, Jamaica. His master's thesis was entitled National Identities versus Regional Identity, the Role of Nationalism Identities in Caribbean integration. Presently, Mr. Sam is employed as a teacher at the Intermediate High School in Kingston. In his spare time, he enjoys listening to podcasts and learning new things. The topic that will be addressed today by Mr. Sam is rethinking the Caribbean identity and its role in regional integration. But before I introduce Mr. Sam, I am sure many of you may have pondered, what exactly is Caribbean identity? How do we define it, given the ethnic and cultural diversity in the region? In the construction of identities, what roles were played by Africa, India, Britain, and perhaps Portugal? Are there convergences and divergences regarding regional integration and Caribbean identity? I have chosen those broad areas. I am not certain as to the scope of Mr. Sam's delivery today, but I hope and trust that some of these issues perhaps may be addressed. So ladies and gentlemen, join me in giving Mr. Sam a hearty welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm not sure if this is protocol or not, but I'm really thankful for everyone that helped to organize this venture and allowed me to just share this information with the public in general.
The whole thing ended in confusion. Curriculum and then character, but somehow a spelling disaster. Mr. West Indian politician, I mean you went to a big institution, and how come you can't unite 7 million? When a West Indian unity, I know it's very easy. If you only rap to your people and tell them like me, them is one race, the Caribbean man, from the same place, the Caribbean man, that make the same trip, the Caribbean man, on the same ship, the Caribbean man. So we must push one common intention, is for a better life in the region, for we women and we children. That must be the ambition of the Caribbean man, the Caribbean man, the Caribbean man.
Now, that song by Black Stallion, 1978, entitled The Caribbean Man or Caribbean Unity, symbolizes the intricacies of constructing a Caribbean identity. And that despite the fact that we have all of these differences or perceived differences, we have certain similarities. And that it is not impossible to view ourselves as one Caribbean. Now, this lecture has certain significance. First and foremost, the Caribbean, unlike many other regions, is consisted of primarily smaller and developing states. And we have a lot of vulnerabilities. And these vulnerabilities make regional integration of significant importance. Now, countries of the region acknowledge that integration is a must in order to survive. But despite this acknowledgement of necessity to integrate, there have been significant barriers. And we have been hearing about the integration process for decades. This integration process spans centuries. And this lecture provides some insight into fostering regional integration. And I hope it provides a new way of thinking about regional integration. Now, before we proceed, there are some key assertions that I would like to make. Some key broad concepts and perspectives that you have to take in acknowledging this topic of regional identity and Caribbean identity and integration. First and foremost, there are different types of Caribbean identity. And we're trying to reconstruct and even reconstruct a new one. Caribbean identity is highly influenced by external forces. And the moderator pointed that out. And I'll delve into this a little bit. And this is the third point, is a key assertion. There are parallels between regional identity and national identity, or between national identity and Caribbean identity. And this parallel is extremely interesting because, for the insular Caribbean, we're primarily made up of island countries, island states. Many of them multi-island states. And the last assertion, globalization and climatic shocks reinforce the importance of regional integration. Now, this lecture, in order to prevent it from being a little bit hard to follow, I gave 5 areas that I'll be focusing on. Caribbean regional identity, regional integration, factors influencing Caribbean regional identity, how do we think our regional identity, and identity and integration. And they might sound very similar, but it is a nuanced topic that is interconnected. And I would like for you first to engage in conversation to kind of understanding this, because it may come off a little bit abstract at first. So, what is the Caribbean? Now, I pointed to this map, and if you're able to see, this is a map of the Caribbean inclusive of the indigenous names of the Caribbean. There are very few territories that actually have the indigenous name of their island as their present state name. Jamaica is Jamaica, one of the few. But we have remnants in different places. Caracou, Bekwai, Mairo. These names have indigenous origin. But we don't reference to our nation states in the Caribbean region by the indigenous names. Puerto Ricans might sometimes call themselves Buraken or Boricua. Why is this so? That even in our names, it is not acknowledging our first name from our first people, the indigenous peoples. And thus we would like to take a step back, a step before colonization, before indentureship, before the enslavement of Africans, before genocide of indigenous peoples, to reconstruct this Caribbean identity and then go forward. And so the Caribbean, according to Gracia, it's a basin, and it refers to the people or the people in the archipelago or the lands around it who share a history marked by political, economic, social, and cultural dynamics of a plantation economies. And so we know that there are certain things. We share this experience of a plantation economy, a plantation system. We share these fundamental similarities, but it is inclusive to the entire basin. More oftentimes when we think about the Caribbean, we think about the insular Caribbean. We think about the islands. But if you look at the entire basin, it can span, if you look at the basin and these cultural elements, it can span from French Guyana to the east, to Panama, Belize, Mexico, and the Bahamas. It is inclusive of both island states, non-independent states, overseas territories, continental territories, and everything in between. Yet oftentimes when we think of the Caribbean, we just think about the insular islands. And so a Caribbean identity refers to ethnic affiliation related to a sense of belonging that you feel, whether through heritage or through associated institutions. So identity really, it's an internal, emotional, and psychological thing. No, it is bound in tangible experiences and tangible things that we see from a day to day. And so just like how somebody identifies as a Vincentian, identifies as an Anglican, identifies as a male or as a female, there are sociological, psychological, and emotional implications of that identity. And so, to quote Owen Arthur, the former Prime Minister of Barbados, we are essentially one people, one Caribbean family molded by experiences. And you oftentimes know you're Caribbean by these shared experiences. It is easy to think of these experiences localized to your singular space, but upon interacting with persons from other countries within this region, other countries that you may not have even thought about, you see the similarities of Caribbean life. And so, in understanding that we are people of this space, shaped by external forces, shaped by colonization and the like, what is regional integration? And it is a process of integrating and bringing together previously autonomous spaces into one whole. It is using separate Caribbean states into a regional organization, and we've seen different types of regional integration. And this integration process, as I said before, is not new. It is not recent. It predates our sovereignty, it predates independence. And we have still yet to yield the true benefits or the maximum benefits of this integration. And so these are some illustrations of evolutions of regional integration. Can anybody in the room identify the flag that is primarily blue and yellow? Anybody? Raise? No? That is the flag of the proposed West Indies Federation. Provided that it had not dissolved, that would have been the flag that much of the English-speaking Caribbean would have identified as their flag. You look at it and there's no emotional sentiment towards it, but it is a symbol, a remnant of what could have been. Anybody can recognize this second image or the image right below the flag? Yeah. University of the West Indies. This is an example of one of the most effective forms of regional integration, and ironically it predates our independence. In other words, since before independence we have done a better job at integrating than after independence. Why is this so? The third picture, right, illustrates anybody can recognize this logo? What? The one primarily in green, the OECS, Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. Following the OECS in the top, left hand corner, is a symbol that brings us much joy and anguish at the same time. West Indies cricket. The West Indies cricket team is the only team that is transnational. We play against Pakistan and India, nations that have actually were once together and split up. We play against England and Ireland, Australia, as one collective team, not as a Jamaica or a St. Vincent or a Windward Islands. And last but not least, the bottom symbol should be quite familiar, CARICOM. And a lot of the case studies that I will be using will be from CARICOM, because CARICOM has shown itself to be one of the most continuous and effective means of regional integration despite its shortcomings. And so here's an illustration of CARICOM, the OECS, and the ACS and their overlapping areas. And the ACS is the Association of Caribbean States. And this is what I envision the Caribbean to be in a broader sense as a pan-Caribbean space. Not just the insular territories, but the entire basin. And you might wonder, wait, how can we envision the entire basin? But let's put it this way. If Belize is a part of the Commonwealth Caribbean and a part of CARICOM, and to the north of Belize is Mexico, then we as the English-speaking Caribbean are neighbors of Mexico. If Martinique is to the north of St. Lucia, then we border France. And we have to reconstruct our ideas of geography, not just in what we're accustomed to, but in what could be. And so this is an illustration of the Caribbean, of CARICOM actually, and the Caribbean. The areas highlighted in yellow are CARICOM member states. And what you can see is that it's a vast area. It's not a small speckled space, primarily made of sea, yes, but it's a vast area if re-envisioned and re-identified. Now, a lot of times, we like to compare the Caribbean regional integration process to Europe. And I said here, and if you follow the present climate in British politics for the last 3 years, it's coming out, and I'll speak to it a little bit. Integration island states and island nations is different to integration in continental or contiguous spaces. In other words, it is easier to integrate one landmass than it is to integrate multiple islands. And the Caribbean is made up of primarily islands, at least numbers-wise if you look at the flags. See? And so we're going to draw parallels between these different spaces. So, what are the factors influencing our regional identity? And what are the factors influencing regional integration? So we understand that the Caribbean is a space of shared experiences, not just of the insular islands and the continental territories, not just of the English and the French or the Portuguese or the Dutch, but of all the different spaces that share this experience. So what are the factors that influence identity? First and foremost, history. And I think that's the most primary, or one of the most primary things we think about when we think about the Caribbean, history. So as a primary school student, we recite, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Right? Or we hear these narratives of, Columbus discovered the Caribbean. And so the Caribbean is generally, in many ways, or this broader sense of territory is generally envisioned initially from a history sense, from a historical perspective. But do we really understand how similar our experiences are of dislocation, conquest, colonialism, slavery, and all these different dynamics that we share that exist in the other things that I'll speak to later? And these factors here are all interconnected. Some of them actually compound each other. Culture. Now, Caribbean culture is a main feature in establishing a collective identity. There are similarities in the way we live, in our experiences, right? It's represented in our history, in our language, in our geography, in our food, in our dance, in our accents that connect to the region. And Stalin in the song says, the whole Caribbean gone blind. If we don't know where we're coming from, then they can't know where we're going. And we underscore the similarities of culture that we share. One author, now, I'm not sure how many persons are even aware of St. Vincent's form of St. Vincent's French influence. We see it in remnants in different places. But did we realize that up until maybe 100 years ago, if not even, probably 70 years ago, there were still persons in St. Vincent speaking a French-based Creole? And we see it all the time in remnants in our language. And this is somewhat of a commentary on Vincentian society. Now permit me to use these words, but we say it all the time. Mako, commerce. And you laugh, you think it's colloquial. Now if I say I macrelage, that's the art of spying. Makwin is French Creole for spying. It's French for spying. When we say commerce, it means business, from the word commerce. When we say label, labels are beautiful, are they not? Yeah? And so we have all of these, and it's even interesting, when we say every tooth man bagay, what are we referring to? Everybody. Tooth bagay just means all things, everything. It's not English. We just assume it to be Vincentian colloquialisms, but we share these similarities. When you look at food, whether it's rice and peas or peas and rice, when you look at its music, whether it's calypso or salsa or bamba or reggaeton or merengue or chutney, all of these similarities in culture overlap to show that yes, we have some degree of connection. And these are just simple visuals, but they show something that, it's amusing. You can see the imagery and you can directly associate with the imagery. This imagery is regardless of language. This imagery is regardless of sovereignty. So that culture is a key part in our identity. Now, one of the key features that has influenced primarily our regional integration and our identity is nationalism. We are geopolitically arranged. In other words, we view ourselves associated with our countries primarily, our geopolitical spaces. And later on, I'm going to rethink and critique this, because who set those boundaries? Who set those borders? Did we as Caribbean nationals set those boundaries? And so, Peters notes that Caribbean people take extreme pride in their own nation state and seem to resent the attempt to group them politically or culturally. And we see this whereby we renounce association with other states depending on stereotypes, and we take extreme pride in it. And there's nothing wrong with having patriotism. But when this patriotism becomes so divisive, we have to comment and question it. Thirdly, insularity. Well, insularity. A huge one. And in fact, there are different references to the Caribbean in using insularity. They say the insular Caribbean, the islands. And to quote Eugenia Charles, former Prime Minister of Dominica, 2 small states are islands, and when islands are also small, 32 small states are islands, and when islands are also small, much of life is conditioned by an awareness of insularity. In other words, when you're from a small island, you're quite aware of your smallness. And this often manifests in a close association of self with space. Right? And she goes to say that making cooperation between islands is problematic and secession is an ever-present possibility. If we look back to the map of the European Union, Brexit, the secession, it's not a continental territory, it's an island, or multiple islands technically. And we've seen these secession movements before. Jamaica seceding from the West Indies Federation, Anguilla seceding from St. Kitts, Nevis and Anguilla. Yeah, St. Kitts, Nevis and Anguilla, that was the collective designation at one point. But what happens if we secede? What happens if our insularity makes us secede into singular territorial spaces? Bekwai already have a flag, you know. Can Bekwai conceptualize itself as an independent sovereign state? Set up all the infrastructure needed? And this is not to poke fun, but I'm just saying that a lot of times we use geographic markers as clear representations of what my country and sovereign space should be. And then if it's proximity, St. Lucia is closer to St. Vincent than Union Island. So why is not St. Vincent and St. Lucia? Because depending on where you are in St. Vincent, you can see St. Lucia. I can't see Union Island from the coast of St. Vincent, from the south coast of St. Vincent. Or if there's a spot that you can see it, please show me. And so this is an element of insularity, that we're accustomed to island spaces many a times, seeing coastlines, seeing clear borders. Can you imagine looking across a mountain and realizing that across that mountain is another country? That you do not belong to the space across that mountain. For me, it's difficult to conceptualize because as an islander, my border oftentimes is the sea. But if you are from a multi-island state, you have this doubly interesting thing that you can see somebody across the sea and know that you are not of me, but you are still a part of me. And so a Bequarian is still a Vincentian. Persons from the Southern Grenadines have a quite unique identity regardless of nation states. But suppose you're from Barbados, or Jamaica, or Dominica. There is no multi-island orientation. Once you cross that sea, that is another country. And so this insularity from something being other, not of. Now geography. And geography is directly connected to our insularity, especially when you're looking at the layout of the Caribbean and Caribbean identity and the different movements. And we see our geography playing a significant role in our insularity because connectivity is directly associated with geography. We are more connected to the metropoles of the world, to the Englands or the United Kingdoms and to the North Americas than to our own Caribbean spaces. Up until, was it summer this year, for maybe 5 years, it used to take me about 24 hours to leave St. Vincent and to arrive in Jamaica. It's about 4 hours flight, but 24 hours. Not because of, it is impossible, not because of flight time, but because of connectivity. At the same time, I could leave St. Vincent and 3 hours later reach to New York. Well, 4 hours. And so we identified that the Caribbean is a vast space. It's not just the insular islands. What about a Belizean? What about reaching Suriname or Guyana or the Bahamas? Because we are island spaces, we have to overcome a geographical impediment that makes us cling on to our near spaces. But further to that, what about other forms of movement? Even in the Eastern Caribbean that has relative accessibility, our geography clearly plays a significant role. There is no harmonization of regional ferries, etc. So we view the sea, and we are as a general term because there are outliers. And I often say, the fishermen and the sailors of the region see the region a different way than persons who live outside of that reality. They see connections where we see barriers. And so our geography, regardless of our distance, we share similar spaces, we share similar imagery. All of these pictures are illustrations from different parts of the Caribbean, the largest being Montserrat, bottom being Bahamas. And so we identify with similar imagery of vegetation, of mountains, of the sea. There are places throughout the region that when you go there, you will see similarities and parallels, and you'll feel like if you are home. But it's not St. Vincent or Guyana or wherever you may call to be home, but you see the parallels. And so geography is a impediment, but we see parallels wherever we go. Last but not least, public awareness. And so lack of public awareness is important in shaping our desire for regional integration, shaping our identity as a region, because if you do not know something, then you cannot associate with it. To put it this way, you could only like somebody, you know. For real. You can only like somebody, you know. And because of our lack of knowledge of the region, it reinforces insularity, and there's minimal association with the region. And public awareness is needed in order to create a community or a citizenship. And lack of education often makes it worse, and we actually may not even know how much the lack of public awareness affects our regional integration process. Because the media is essential in shaping identity. Now, Gellner, who speaks about emerging communities, speaks about how media and public awareness helps to galvanize or bring together countries. For example, Union Island, and we have a beautiful case, or Canoan, or Beckway. They receive the same SVG TV news. They're aware of the same issues. And so when something happens there, they feel a part of it, but it is not a part of the contiguous St. Vincent and the Grenadines. You're going overseas technically. You're going over water. Multiple states that have multiple islands have that same thing. So media is essential in crafting a sense of community, in shaping identity. And so we have to rethink this identity, void of geopolitical, imperial experiences, you know, fragmentation. And this is where it gets interesting, right? Much of our Caribbean identity and nationhood is governed by something called Ute Possidetis Juris, international law. Here's where it gets interesting. And we have to rethink this in order to rethink our identity and in order to rethink our association. Ute Possidetis Juris. And oftentimes, as I said before, we have an island-centric approach to integration that is precluded by insularity. In other words, I am from St. Vincent. Somebody from outside of St. Vincent is not one of us. I am from St. Lucia. Somebody from outside of St. Lucia is not one of us. But why is this so? Now, Ute Possidetis Juris is a principle that basically makes post-colonial states respect the boundaries that they inherited in their colonial periods. And we see this principle in Latin America and in Africa, especially Africa. Now, the thing about Latin America and Africa, they are continental spaces primarily. And so when Ute Possidetis Juris happens, you have it in continental spaces. But what happens when it's islands? Right? So basically, to explain Ute Possidetis Juris, it could be possible to envision St. Vincent as cut in half. As in southern St. Vincent as one colonial territory, and northern St. Vincent as another colonial territory. Just like how Haiti is one island, Hispaniola, divided into Dominican Republic and Haiti. But we did not set these boundaries as persons of the Caribbean. They were set in the colonial era. And the ironic thing about it, even in our colonial administration as islands more so, we were always governed collectively. I joke with Jamaicans when I tell them that Jamaicans and Cayman Islanders are cousins, because up until 1960 it was Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, and now you have different processes to enter into Jamaica. They're cousins 60 years ago, so there is not sufficient time to say that there's a significant ethnic divide. I mean, there's certain subtle cultural differences, but that happens anywhere. There are subtle cultural differences between the urban spaces in St. Vincent and the rural spaces, and that happens anywhere. So let's further investigate Uti Possidetis Juris. And so this is a map of Africa, right? And we have two maps. The first map is of the colonial demarcations of Africa at the end of the Berlin Conference. And once again, we have to understand that our national ties and our identity has not been shaped primarily by us locally or internally, but by outside forces. And to even contextualize this, in the case of Africa, they had indigenous peoples living in the space that was taken up, the Africans. And so imagine if you are from Benin or Togo or Ghana, and depending on your ethnic group, you are one people. But somebody puts an arbitrary line to say that you are now a part of a colony and you must learn a different language. And so despite the fact that I may be speaking English in Ghana, my same ethnic, my partner or somebody in my ethnic group is now speaking Portuguese in Cote d'Ivoire, or has to learn Portuguese. And so we see that Uti Possidetis Juris has led to even the formation of African states, not in a state of ethnic origin, because you have ethnicity spanning multiple states, but based on colonial administration. And especially in the Caribbean, we see that if you go throughout many islands, we see overlaps in ethnicities, especially in the Eastern Caribbean, especially throughout the Caribbean. Now granted, we're not a monolith. Similarly, two different maps, Canada and the other map, thank you, Canada and Australia. Now, Canada and Australia is not solely contiguous. We see islands being made up of the different territories. But because they are primarily contiguous, upon independence, they form themselves as one space. Now, granted, it is easy to envision Canada as multiple spaces. And we see this friction ever present if you look at the relation with Quebec and the rest of Canada. Quebec being more francophone, and this tension that occurs because of this. It is easier to envision Canadians as one group because it's primarily a contiguous space. But the orientation of Canada reflects Uti Possidetis Juris likewise. Similarly, Australia is referred to as an island continent. It is big enough to cut up into multiple states for administration. Yet they have coalesced into one space. And that's why I bring the parallel again with the European Union. And I'll say this again, it is easier to have an identity and to integrate in contiguous spaces. Islands have insularity shaped by their geography. So, identity and integration. What are some theories that kind of explain our identity? And once again, it's rethinking. So much of this is grounded in a skepticism towards any one theory. But just for us to open our minds a little bit and say, how can we reconstruct this? Now, one formation of national and regional identity and integration is primordialism. Primordialism basically says that my mother is from here, my grandmother is from here, my great-grandmother is from here. And so the nation is innately born because of a long-standing tradition. So you have a national consciousness because of innate ethnic ties. But no two Caribbean states have the same ethnic makeup. And as the song says, we all came on one ship. and not literally, but a tale of the Caribbean existence is that sojourn via sea. Now, if we were to take a primordial approach to Caribbean identity, how many persons in this room identifies as an indigenous or First Nation person? And so we could primarily identify as persons of African descent, but the Caribbean is not just that. So in shaping our Caribbean identity, it cannot just be our primordial one that we have always been here, because so many persons have come to the Caribbean. It is referred to as a melting pot, right? Another idea when it comes to identity and integration is situationalism. It's not about ethnic ties primarily forming national identity, and in this case regional identity, because I said we were making parallels between national and regional identity. But it is saying that resources and the pursuit of common interests allow persons to create an identity together and form a state and form a space and form a region and cooperate and integrate. And so situationalism would in general make sense, but why have we yet to have an encompassing idea of integration? And I said this again, it is easier to integrate in contiguous spaces. Small islands and islands have insularity because of their geography. And so even though the Caribbean islands are extremely vulnerable to climatic shocks, that every year we look with fear at the weather forecast, wondering if it is our turn. Despite all of the economic and security benefits to integration and to a wider and deeper integration, we have still had hesitance to integration. So it can't be from a rational perspective. It cannot be because we're pursuing common interests. Because if, as Stalin said, to make a better life for the Caribbean man, if that was the primary goal, then we would have integrated long ago, far deeper. And so what I propose is constructivism. It poses that national identity is an ideological construct that filters identity. That it is constructed based on institutions to make us feel connected. In other words, the day-to-day living of somebody in an urban part of St. Vincent may be different from somebody in a rural space. Not necessarily the same, right? Somewhat different. And I use the Grenadines as a beautiful parallel, and we see it all the time. Persons in the Grenadines live a different life to some degree than persons in the mainland. And this is not to be condescending or intelligent, to acknowledge that we like to assume that we are monoliths, we're all the same, but our different geographical spaces require a different type of life, but they are still a part of us. And so we must now establish institutions and frameworks that allow us to see ourselves as one space, not just based on proximity, because if it is proximity, it really could be St. Vincent and St. Lucia. And proximity, you can realign things accordingly, but we can reorient based on ideology and perception. And so C.L.R. James and Eric Williams have indicated that despite our similar histories, right, there is not enough strong of an identity to break the colonial barriers. And it is this colonial status quo that was utilized in creating our present national identities. And what does this mean? When we leave our Caribbean spaces and go into the diaspora, we have no problem associating as a group. You go to the United Kingdom, you go to the United States, Europe. I mean, even when I was in Jamaica, I identified as an Eastern Caribbean. Before then, I thought it was just a geographical designation. Sorry. I was not aware of the cultural nuances to that space. But yet, we stick to our colonial status quo, holding on to these island spaces. And what is the colonial status quo? Of insular administrative spaces that were made to compete for the benefit of the metropole. Much of the competition that has characterized Caribbean states has not been to our benefit. We compete in many areas. We compete in tourism, we compete in agriculture. Depending on the state, you compete in economic citizenship. Who could provide the best deal? And so there's a constant sense of competition within the region. a constant sense of wanting up each other. Some scholars have posited that even in the independence movement, the reason why there was not a desire for collective independence as space, because each state wanted to have a one-up, to be the first to throw the colonial, the colonial shackle off. Because we had internalized competition, and we still see it to this day. No competition necessary for innovation. But we have to acknowledge that our insularity and our smallness prevents us from allowing a certain development in and of our own small insular space. In other words, if our island space, as in each island that persons live, was to be our national space, how would a union, how would a Myro exist economically? And can you maximize your development and your economy if that one space is the sum total of your national and economic and social development? And so a strong regional identity is needed to maximize the anxiety towards the compromises needed for integration. For freedom of movement, freedom of trade, for currency union, all of them rely on a shared perception of community or necessity, especially community. The idea and speeches towards integration is all good and fine and fun until the things that makes us anxious come into play. And what makes us anxious? The fact that as states, to integrate, you must give up something. Sovereignty, our right to control our own decisions. But that happens in any form of life, that the collective good is greater than the individual. That's why we have laws. As a society, we come together and say collective, we will abide by certain rules for a cohesive society. But because of our colonial histories and past, we find it so easy to clamor on to this authority. We would rather rule in hell than to serve in heaven, as it were. And so we face extreme anxiety when it comes to freedom of movement. What happens if our territories become overrun by other persons, these others that are not similar to us? Despite the fact that the OECS has freedom of movement, indefinite stay, we don't fear a wave migrations of Dominicans. Right? And it's ironic because that we feel this anxiety towards free movement when the Caribbean has a significant diaspora elsewhere. In the latter part of the 20th century and onward, we have been a migratory people with relatives all over the world. So isn't it not ironic and hypocritical that we fear migration from our own people within our own space when we are migrating to other spaces? And so when you hear insular rhetoric within the Caribbean, it's funny. Right? And things such as a currency union, deciding your currency, deciding your rate on your currency. Is it floating? Is it fixed? States want the ability to decide it. Because St. Vincent as a singular state, as a part of the OECS currency union, we don't have that decision. And it's hard to give up that authority. And so, persons in, say, for example,